All right, it is Tuesday, April 29, at least in the old calendar. In the new calendar, it is day one of Carney. Before it was BC, before Carney is the way the new Canadian calendar works. There was darkness and then there was Carney. At least that's the way, if you watched some of the election coverage, that a lot of his supporters sounded like. We are joined today by Mark Holthe, who, if you are online, probably needs no introduction. Mark is, I don't actually know your title, the founder, the owner, the partner of Holthe Immigration Law,
Yeah,
and the
whatever.
head of the Canadian Immigration Institute, which
Is it Holthe
is,
or Holthe? I've always pronounced
It's
your name.
Holthe. It's Holthe.
oh, it's Holthe.
I'm letting Stephen. Yeah, he's cool. He can pronounce. It's pronounced a lot of different ways. Sometimes not even according to the spelling. So.
Oh, that's like my last name. I get everything from the correct Murins to manure. So
Nice.
thanks for coming on, Mark. A lot of
Yeah.
people have said that we should cross collaborate more.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think I had you on a few years back. We talked about a few little things back then, but no, it's good to be here. These are fun times, interesting times.
This is the day after the election, where I think right now it's a minority Carney government. I think they're still counting ballots, Deanna was saying somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's just that I think they're still counting ballots, but that there are 11 ridings that they say are too close to call. And so I think because of that, they're not officially saying whether or not he's going to have a majority or a minority.
What are your initial thoughts on the election before we get into the immigration implications? I've titled this episode to show you where I might be going with it as Mark Carney wins 100 million Canadians with a question mark. So why don't we start though with what your overall thoughts of the election were?
Sure, I'll jump in here. Like we were talking about before we kind of went live here, it's quite amazing to me just how quick the shift was. But when I stood back and I kind of thought about it, people, they don't, like, it's hard for them to change their political alignment. And I understand, like, it's going from the People's Party to the Conservatives, or going from NDP to Liberal. I think that's okay. Like, you see that happening depending on who's leading. Like, we look at the days of Jack, right, and the power that he wielded within the NDP, and what would have happened to the party if he hadn't passed away. And you look at what's happened with the Liberal Party. All it took was a shift in leader to really regain the confidence of their traditional voter base. And so, and a little bit tongue in cheek, I said, are we ever going to have another Conservative government in Canada? And, I still do kind of feel that way a little bit. And, we're going to get into a little bit more into the weeds here. But when I was looking at just how the population has changed in Canada, and the Liberals, they were quite masterful in how they ran their campaign. But I remember, and obviously I've had lots of discussions with the Conservatives and my local MP here. And I remember having a discussion with her about 3.5, 4 years ago. And I said, look, you guys need to pay attention to international students, because they're coming from all over the world. They're studying in our post-secondary institutions. Generally speaking, it's a liberal education that they're getting. Mm-hmm. And when they come out, it's literally 2 years and they're citizens. So 50% of them went to Ontario, and I can't imagine that it didn't have some impact and effect on the votes. And so, I'm not saying that the Liberals are engineering votes by any stretch, but it's a reality, and our demographic is kind of changing.
It's interesting because the general perception is that immigrants tend to often be more conservative in their leaning. Like, I know in the BC election, Surrey went conservative, and that was attributed to immigrants. My general takeaway on the whole conservative thing is, in the Poilievre's leadership, or even to go back a step, Harper united the Progressive Conservatives and the Reform Party.
Yeah.
And the sense that I got from a lot of Poilievre's leadership style and messaging was, if you're PC, you might as well be a Liberal. And he almost seemed to actively be trying to shove them out. Like, he's fighting openly with progressive premiers, or he might not be personally, but his team is fighting with Doug Ford, Progressive Conservative, Tim Houston, Progressive Conservative, didn't endorse John Rustad out in BC, although I don't think John Rustad would be described as progressive conservative, but
Yeah.
I think there was a bit of like, well, if you're going to tell red Tories that they're basically liberals, a lot of them might wind up voting liberal.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think just so much of this election was figured by what people didn't want as opposed to what they did. I think that they were signaling what that they wanted somebody to stand up to Donald Trump very clearly, who was the more equipped to do that job, and just a fear of anything that signaled toward that. And so, I think that there was a strong dislike for Trudeau in the last days of his administration. And so had he stayed in the position for any longer, I mean, he couldn't really have, but, the fact that we saw what I certainly thought was going to be a resounding win for Poilievre. And then Carney stepped in, and just a decisive shift. Like, I don't think we've ever in Canadian history seen somebody going from, like, I thought that the Liberals were going to get trounced. I was worried they weren't going to make official party status, before Carney stepped up. But the idea that in that short span of time, going from that to potentially even winning a majority is something that I think was like politically unthinkable. And so that was major ground. That was shocking to me. To see how effectively that was managed. But again, I think that that's so much people just being afraid. And as soon as they had any option that seemed viable, that they just jumped on it. And there you had it. I don't know that he has necessarily this groundswell of support for his entire base. It was just like, okay, this feels safe for now. And it was conservative. I think Steve and I have been saying this for weeks. He crept so far to the right that really it was just like he was satisfying the conservative base as well. And just like,
he crept so far to the right, and now is probably, if he does a coalition, going to have to rely on the NDP. Unless he governs like Harper did in the minority, where issue by issue he draws by different parties.
Yeah.
And what I saw was a realignment back to center, at least with how he was presenting himself, which then gave him the biggest opportunity to pull across, folks that were on the right. But the Liberals, they literally ran a masterful campaign. And, one of the things that they did leverage was that fear, tremendous.
For sure.
And people were really voting out of fear to some extent, not so much about what the platforms were.
Totally.
No, I don't think the platforms moved anything.
Why? I couldn't figure that. Why the heck did they not release them until basically, after the advanced polls? But
yeah,
anyway,
I think they had nothing to gain. I think people had such a diving into Carney that all he had was to lose once he started specifying things.
Yeah, exactly.
Everybody was imprinting what they wanted on him.
Yeah,
that's fine.
He has nowhere to go but down.
And they also did a masterful job of aligning Poilievre with Trudeauisms. I shouldn't say Trudeau, with Trumpisms.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like they were masterful in saying, look, the same positions he's taking is the same positions Trump is taking. And if you vote for him, then understand you're going to have the same world here in Canada as they're experiencing in the US. And, the media were unbelievably, supportive of that message.
It will
the
always be a mystery to me why, once Trump started doing what he was doing, Doug Ford, who's a progressive conservative, had the political instincts to put on a hat, and Ontario swooned. And Poilievre did not take the same approach. And I'll always wonder, I mean, I'm sure there'll be leaks that come out to explain it, but why that was.
Yeah.
So do you think he governs like he has a majority? Do you think the NDP are weak enough that he can pretty much, because like the Liberals over the past 4 years or since 2021 were pretty much able to do what they wanted. There isn't really much, like the NDP, I think, got a little bit, couple drugs and pharmacare.
Yeah.
But to the extent, like, I feel like Carney essentially has a mandate to do what he wants.
Well, when you look at it, like, I think he needs more than the NDP, doesn't he? Like, I don't think collectively between him and
but he has enough with the NDP. I think.
Does he have enough with the NDP now?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
But again, I mean, like if they can actually form a coalition, I think that I think that he has enough with the two of them. that's assuming that they will ally properly. I think at least they did at the close of last night. Again, I mean, it still is up in the air. I think, did they end at 168?
They're at 168 right now.
Yeah. And I think that's with the NDP at 7.
Seven,
There
yeah,
are a couple NDP positions that could go, NDP constituencies that could go Liberal even. So if they switch, then they would switch to Liberal. Nunavut and I think Vancouver Kingsway are the ones that are 2 potential swings. But yeah, so it's 168 plus 7. I think that
that's them over.
Yeah, they'd have to lose 4 or 5 by-elections, the Liberals. Going to the Conservatives, not the NDP, before they would be able to break that reliance. If they choose to go that way. I really don't actually know, like, Mark Carney, I liked him during the campaign. I can't say that I really know what he wants to do. It's still like, so I actually don't know, like, will he approach the NDP? Will he try to do it issue by issue?
Yeah.
I have no idea.
Did you guys listen to his acceptance speech?
No.
Yeah, it was very it was quite interesting. Again, it's hard to know how much that is politicking and how much of that is substantive, but it was very much about unity and about humility and about, trying to actually govern for all of Canada. It seemed very much it wasn't like a winners speech. It was very much about like, we're going to need to come together. We're going to try and build a united Canada. We're going to try and really build infrastructure. We're going to, really address the housing situation. We're trying to build free trade within the country. We don't need to, like, it was very like, it was a bit of a tub thumping speech. And I think it was well directed, I have to say. I think he did well by that. And it was about, building capacity within Canada, building the strongest Canada, building new allies that are not looking to the South exclusively. And so, I think that will speak to, to coalition building, to actually doing that sort of thing. I thought the best comment of the night, I was watching different types of coverage, but one comment that came from, what's her name? Chantal Hébert. I think that's the one that
on CBC.
Yeah. And she was saying that, he has to be very mindful that this isn't sort of like a Paul Martin government where, like it ends up being a very, very short term where, that he finds a way of like, kind of continuing to build capacity and build relevance within the government in general. And I thought that was.
Or is the takeaway they were down 25 points in the polls?
Yeah,
they can pretty much do what they want.
Yeah, that was one of the things, the things that I felt, Stephen. I'm just so shocked. So now all we need to do is just, if things are going so well, let's just swap out our leader, bring someone new and fresh, and kickstart things.
Yeah, I actually heard, and I mean, you're from Alberta. Is the comparison to Alberta apt? Because I heard a lot of people saying it's similar to what the Conservatives in Alberta do to maintain perpetual majorities, is like, as soon as one is unpopular, you just swap the leader.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly how it played out. We had the one term there of NDP when they were just so fed up with the party, right? When everybody, they just needed change. And it's hard, when you're in power for a long period of time, and the Liberals experienced that, you start to lose touch with the grassroots, the people you're actually supposed to be serving. And it becomes more about, myself and advancing my political career, and less so about representing those who actually got you there in the first place. Yeah. And so sometimes that things become a little stale, and that's the only way you can really shift things up. You look at Kenny and what he went through, and you make a few wrong decisions, and then your party kind of turns on you, and that's where the change occurs from within.
So what does this mean for immigration policy? I can, we've discussed the platforms last.
Yeah, like
a couple episodes ago
was it's like, okay, what was their platform and what are they going to do? I think they're, it's kind of like, well, we're not slamming the door shut on immigration by any stretch, but we are going to slow things down a little bit, kind of figure things out, reset, then I
And
still
they're going to
think
continue what they've been doing. It's the
They're gonna
previous
continue
government's
doing it.
plan, right? Like, there's
Yeah.
all these media like things. Oh, Carney is about to implement drastic changes to
No.
Canada's immigration system, and I'm just like, it literally is the Trudeau 2025 to
Yeah.
2027 plan.
Yep.
Like,
What's funny, in his acceptance speech, Carney talked a lot about skilled workers. He didn't talk about immigration, but he talked a lot about skilled workers. And so it's sort of like I couldn't help but wonder whether or not he was foreshadowing that that he's going to be looking for like capacity building in order to grow Canadian industry and all of that sort of thing. Because to build that sort of capacity, do we have that actual? Do we have that inside of Canada already? Or is this to some extent about, because he talked about construction and building housing and all of this kind of thing. I sort of feel like my read was that he was building. He was foreshadowing what he's intending to do in order to say we are going to need to rely on foreign workers and skilled workers to actually meet those labor market needs and start kind of building that capacity. But who knows?
And if he actually follows through with that, then maybe they are a different government. Then
they would need to abandon the plan.
And the reason I say that is because how in the world can you justify that as a rationale when February the 13th, 2021 happened, where you literally invited every single person that was in the pool, that was a CEC, the lowest score, 75.
Yeah.
And, that was all about, we're making, we're hitting the levels at all costs. And I remember having a discussion with Mendicino about this when we're on the national executive. And he asked us, well, what do you recommend we should do about this? And of course we said, well, if you lower the points, you've got lots of people that are here, but never in my wildest dreams would I ever have imagined that they would have invited everyone. And for us immigration lawyers, it really, we had mud on our faces, because I told people repeatedly, if someone's charging you to submit a profile at 75 points, I would have considered that unethical. And then
I was the same.
Yeah. And people came back and said, so now what are we doing? Well, if you have an option at anything, you pursue everything and hope something sticks almost. Whereas in the early part of our practices, we would look at someone who was filing 2 separate applications saying, well, do you not understand immigration? Like, one of them is always the best option, whether it's speed or, your strength of application. But it's, And now if the shift really is, then, and I'll ask you guys, what are they going to do about French? The mandate, he's come out and said it's still high important.
I just saw Steve take a big suck of breath.
It's funny. There's somebody who messages me. There's actually 2 people now who message me to say, oh, 20 minutes into the podcast and you haven't mentioned oh, there it is. So right now the plan, it's funny because someone was messaging me earlier, another immigration lawyer, to say, hey, are you going to talk about what you want vis-a-vis immigration? And I sent them a tweet of Mark Carney's that was, we're going to increase Francophone to 12%.
Yeah.
And they said, what is this, a meme? And I went, no, this is the actual, like, what they're calling for. So the current plan would be there's no room for anyone else, right? And Mark Carney is taking the current Francophone emphasis, which is really, for those who kind of wonder why we keep talking about French, it's immigration is a zero. Immigration is a zero-sum game because the government sets a cap, and the more spaces that they allocate to Francophones, it is crowding out everyone else, to the point that you have people quitting their jobs in Canada in skilled positions to try to study French to immigrate. And Mark Carney is doubling down on it. Now, that's if you believe that he sticks to his plan. As I said, and as the title of the episode hints at, and what the Conservatives alleged, is that Mark Carney is going to rapidly increase immigration and Canada's population. And I think that will be the case. And so here are just some of the reasons where I'll make the case for it, and then we can discuss, how likely is this. First, he did bring in the founder of the Century Initiative, which is Mark Wiseman, as one of his senior advisors. And it's interesting when I listened to some other podcasts that talked about this with like liberal campaigners, they would say both it's a conspiracy to think that he's going to have influence. And by the way, why would that be a bad thing to get to 100 million? So the fact that they were adding that latter part makes me think that it could be in the works. Second, I think that there's a couple other podcasts and media articles that have started to say, to confront Trump, our big weakness is that the Canadian market is too small vis-a-vis the United States. We're a tenth the size or ninth of them. Therefore, we need to increase Canada's population. They brought back Sean Fraser, right, who was rightly or wrongly attributed with out of control immigration in 2023. Whether that's fair to attribute to him, they did bring him back despite that image. Mark Miller would say stuff like, we need to wait until after the election to mass regularize people's status. The scale of some of the projects that they're talking about on infrastructure, and I mean, I don't know if there'll still be pipelines given that they're going to have to rely on the NDP and the bloc, but that will require people. And I just think that it all points to at least a strong theory, which I believe that they are going to increase population. Am I a conspiracy theorist? What are your thoughts?
Well, one thing we know is that it was a little bit of a black mark for him during the campaign when people were trying to link him to it. So this morning, I just went and checked out the Century Initiative website just to see, and you have to dig to find 100 million by 2100. Like it used to be, I swear, maybe they haven't changed the site, but it used to be right at the beginning, I thought, on the website. It was front and center. This is the initiative we have. It's good for Canada. And now it's kind of tucked away a little bit further. You have to dig, kind of find it. And they mention all the other things, the initiatives that they're pursuing. So no, I'm on side with you. And a little side anecdote. When I talked with Deanna, my wife, Deanna, we were talking about, it was probably February, maybe it was January, but the Conservatives were well ahead. And I said to her, look, like I've had discussions with some of the MPs, and immigration is going to look different. And what will it do to my practice? And we're very transactional. And so what other alternative, things might I do? Because I really don't like the general practice of law. And I said, well, I love AI. Maybe I'll transition to becoming an AI consultant for lawyers or something like that. And then when the election came around, I said to my wife, well, we don't need to worry about my practice anymore. And I don't know about you guys, but I've never, with even the measures that are happening right now, I've never been busy in the 20 whatever odd years of practice, never been more busy than I am now. It's a crazy world. And so, yeah, from our perspective, it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out, but I'm with you, Stephen.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know about that. I mean, I'm certainly busy as well, but with a different kind of people being caught in very difficult, unfortunate situations. I don't, it's about, whether or not the system is treating people in a humane way. It's sort of, in terms of what's going to happen, in terms of the way that immigration is going to work from a numbers perspective, I honestly don't know. I don't think that what we heard during the election is much of a reflection of what we're going to see. I think that was a lot of campaign talk. I think it was trying to capture the attention of the electorate, but
which part?
I think just the talk about cutting down, the talk about austerity measures, that kind of thing. I think that there is still going to be very much a focus on human capital. So I don't think that part is going to shift. I think there is going to be very much about defrauding, so I think that part is going to continue to impact the practice. I think if you're doing high-skilled economic immigration, I think there's still going to be an increase in that, trying to help people find spots within that high-scaled component. But I think there's going to continue to be this general erosion of democratic process and of procedural fairness and all of that sort of thing. So
I mean, they're still laying off half of IRCC, and Mark Carney says AI will basically be able to bridge the gap, which to date we've seen how that works.
So I think that the federal court practice is going to continue to really suffer. The practice before the board is going to continue to really suffer. So yes, busy, busy, busy work, but I think to the real detriment of democratic and procedurally fair charter-proof processes. So I think that that's really going to suffer, but I don't think the actual numbers are going to go down. I just think that they're going to be really preferring high skilled economic over humanitarian of any sort immigration. And I think that they're going to be using continuously more technologically driven solutions for establishing who those are. And I don't personally think that those systems have proven to be very smart. So I think that they're they're efficient perhaps, but I don't think that they're smart, because I think that they don't consider all the nuance of human experience. And so, the same way that you're bringing in French speakers, calling them francophone, that they speak French the same level that I do, and I could not hold down a good job in a French speaking environment. It's
No, that's
silly.
stat. I mean, they can hit their francophone target by, and I think it would not surprise me if right now to be francophone for permanent residents is like language benchmark 7 across all areas. For a work permit, it's benchmark 5 for speaking and listening. And I would not be surprised if they amend the permanent stream to match the work permit stream, lowering what it is to be a francophone, because a lot of this is all just definitional stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing when it comes to their 5% target. Steve, how can they how can they massively ramp up foreign workers if they've got a target of 5% work permit holders and study permit holders? You just don't require that those workers have work permits. Asylum claimants, they can work without a work permit for the duration of their claim on a visitor record. Spouses of international
Not on a visitor
students.
record, but they get a work permit.
No, but why give them a work permit? That's what I'm saying in the future. Remove them from the stats of who's working. Spouses of students, give them a visitor record. They can work without a work permit. There's all sorts of ways to increase the number of foreign workers by just saying, in intracompany transfers.
Yeah, and doing all this stuff too about depriving spousal work permits is a way of it's just stupid. This is not good social engineering at all.
It's
no, but it's the way that that's how you thread the needle between getting to 5% foreign workers, which are the work permit holders, and you increase the numbers
That's just
overall.
Stats manipulation, though. It doesn't actually do any good for the building of community and for enabling actually effective establishment and.
What you call stats manipulation, I call making a campaign promise and fulfilling it.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
When I think about this, the goal, at least the stated goal, to increase skilled immigration, and you look at how many people are here in the country and the steps that they took, especially with the removal of job offers. If I was to point to one thing that I could see them reinstituting, or if someone's listening to this, it would be to reinstitute the 200 points for execs and CEOs. Especially, I would also add on reallocation of the PNPs. I'm a firm believer. I would rather see 75% economic immigration allocated to the PNPs, 25% held at the federal level, and let the feds deal with the family and humanitarian stuff.
100%. I agree with that, Mark.
That was when people were talking about the different scenarios, and it was like, what would the conservatives and the bloc agree on? And I thought massive expansion of the PNPs, and a reduction in everything else.
I just want to address too a comment that's coming in about increasing the French asset. And I don't I want to be clear. I don't have any challenge at all with the idea of increasing the French asset. I think that that's a laudable goal. I don't think that that's what they're doing here, though. I think that they're bringing in people who have a very minimal understanding of French. They might be literally quitting their jobs to study to get that baseline amount, but have absolutely no attachment whatsoever to French. They don't have a requirement that they work in French, that they have any intent to do any work in the French community or anything like that. And so I feel like it's just a throwaway points thing. They go, they get tutored, they write the test, and then that's it. So
My
I feel
clients
like-
who have done the Francophone program have all been Chinese who have never been to Canada, will never use French when they get here.
Yeah. I'll fill you guys in on one thing. So I'm involved with our local immigration partnership here in Lethbridge. There's, all across the country, they have these, in the smaller communities, they have these partnerships where it's all about integrating newcomers into the community and pulling in all the stakeholders, the schools, to the language, language instruction, all these kinds of things. And in our meeting a couple months ago, our college lost their language program, their English language program, because the funding got cut. There were a bunch of other organizations that also had their language instruction, that funding cut. But guess which organization has more money than they know what to do with right now? It's the local Francophone community organization. So in that meeting, they said, yeah, we've got lots, and we got lots of funding. And so there is absolutely an attempt to support people in the expansion of French and, in outside of Quebec. And even in our own little city here of Lethbridge, that's what we're seeing. And I have to imagine that same level of funding is happening. But to cut the English at the same time, and this English program at the college was a multi-million-dollar kind of venture. It was one of the premier programs for people to level up their English. My wife and I, we actually started a free language class, and we do that, once a week in our community. And I don't know what's going to, if it's going to have any kind of a dent in the process, but yeah, there's a big push, and you just follow the dollars.
And like creating scholarships for people to come and do French language studies like this, I can understand actually having an impact where people would actually create more French language community. But the idea of just having it be a throwaway points thing that creates benefits that I don't know. I just don't see there being any actual attachment.
Well, you remember there was that little glitch when they were playing around with the CRS calculator, where 75 points were popping up for French. Did you guys see that?
Yeah.
So
I mean, I've seen through the ATIPs, there was talk that if they can't get their numbers, they'll just be a standalone program. And once again, though, the issue isn't that, and we're not being critical of like the idea of Francophone immigration. It's that it is zero sum. So they are basically, this is not an exaggeration. You have to choose. Do you choose someone who went to school at a university in Vancouver or Calgary, has been working for 2 years, has lived in Canada for 5 years, or do you choose someone who's never been to Canada and speaks French? And that is the choice that is being presented, and the government is preferring the latter right now. I have a hard time seeing how it will continue, but I've been surprised at how long it has continued. But the only explanation that I've heard, and Mark, what is your theory? Like, I've had a few people, and we discussed this last time, is that it's an indirect way of imposing country caps.
Yeah, I know that's a reality. Like you look at the impact that the whole language, the weighting of language had on China, right? Like they were, and not that they're not still up there, but when they added, when Express Entry was created, I think one of the countries that was impacted the most right off the bat was China.
And India, I think, as well. Yeah.
No, India benefited from the language.
India
is the Francophone program a way to reduce Indian immigration?
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah. And so it is. I think it is. But, and like you were saying, with their intentions. So you're saying, okay, if you can't renew your work permit, we're blocking off all areas 6% unemployment or greater. You can't extend your permit. But you have a program, the Francophone program, that says, like you identify, Stephen, if you can just find a way to level up your French to level 5, then you can stay with no caps as long as you want. So, it's working against their desire on the percentage side. So, the interesting thing is Carney was pretty clear, at least in his messaging, that they wanted to take things slow, that they, weren't going to increase substantially the annual levels plans, keep it around the high 3s, low 400s. But it's pretty easy to, when you're talking about those percentages and hitting them, you boost the overall numbers up, and you do what you can to transition as many TRs to PR within Canada, and I said that deliberately, is there a possibility that they will also do that, which will help them achieve their 5%? They just transition more. But it's interesting with the approach that they took. And I think the reason that they did most of it was political. And they saw the writing was on the wall, and it was a huge tool. So it wouldn't surprise me if they, especially, I don't mean to jump around, but the one that drove me the most crazy was the undocumented construction workers in Toronto. And I understand that, there's a need there. But why in the world do you incentivize employers who are just more than happy to employ workers illegally, like drastically underpay them?
And there's no program for in-status construction workers who maintain their work permits.
Right. And 5 years in order to qualify. So you're saying we want 1 million people out, but if you just go underground and stick around for 5 years, and I'm not saying that that's how it's going to play out, then there might be a chance and just start working construction. So
yeah, I mean, I think in British Columbia in December, we had an election where the provincial government the NDP that would go on to win basically promised everyone $1,000. And almost immediately after the election, they said, well, with Trump now, we can't stick to that. And I think, and as far as I can tell, they haven't paid any punishment in the polls or anything. I think that Trump gives Carney the ability to move on from whatever he wants under the guise of, look, the situation's changed. Trump's doing whatever now.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're going to jack it up.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other one coming up is, I can never remember the name of this case, the Borkfist, the citizenship by descent one.
Oh, yeah.
Is another interesting, because you look at Carney's, we're going to look at ways to attract them. We want to attract Americans. We want to attract Americans. As Amandeep Hire would say, there's probably millions of people who may be eligible for citizenship by descent in the United States. Depending on what they what measures, if any, because they keep stalling it, bring in, that could be a huge area of growth for the population, as there's all of a sudden millions potentially of new Canadians.
Yeah, so that's been extended now until November.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I think that's more likely now that Pierre Poilievre didn't win his seat, so he's not going to be jamming Parliament, preventing any legislation from getting through. No. And I think all the parties are going to I think, it's almost like last man standing. Carney has a seat. Singh doesn't. Yeah. Poilievre doesn't. Singh's resigned. The other parties, I think, are going to be in a little bit of rebuilding, figuring out what they're about mode, that Carney should be able to get stuff through.
Yeah, I mean, it will be very interesting to see what happens. As I understand it, Poilievre has said that he's intending to stay on as party leader. I don't know how that works, actually, once you've lost your seat.
The Greens tried it here, didn't they? Although I think Sonia Furstenau wound up stepping down. I assume he's going to, if he wants to keep his seat, he's going to have to run in a safe riding somewhere. But either way, that's going to distract him for quite some time, and would leave the Conservatives, I would think, distracted for some time.
For sure.
Yeah.
So whether he sticks around or not, I don't know. But I don't think it'll impede Carney with whatever it is he's got planned.
And one thing we can't ignore is what's happening in the U.S., and I'm sure your phones are ringing nonstop. I'd say probably 30% of the consultations I do. And my practice is a little bit different because I do a lot of consultations, short little, I'll answer your question kind of thing. And I would say about 30% are often US citizens. And so we talk about fear. And a lot of them, whether it's rational or not, it's real for them. They are genuinely concerned about the future of their world in the US. And, I've done all kinds of Canadians looking to come back with their spouses, lots of spousal sponsorship. I did an immigration attorney in Florida who moved to Ontario, or is in the process of moving with her husband. And we're just seeing so many more of those individuals that are now looking at Canada and exploring it. Mm-hmm. So we'll see how CUSMA, the renegotiation of that, what impact that will have on,
that's the big one coming up.
Mm-hmm. But I had one client just the other day who, she had a great grandfather from New Brunswick was born there, and then went to the U.S. And I said, well, get a birth certificate. Let me take a look at it. But she's also a psychologist, so she fits under CUSMA. She's got lots of options, but she was genuinely concerned about her autistic son. I'm not sure where it comes from, but she said they were, Trump and they were trying to document where all of the autistic children were. And her husband was a permanent resident from the UK, a green card holder, and she was concerned about him. And so, real or perceived, it doesn't matter. But individuals are, seriously concerned about their futures and what's happening in the U.S. And they're going to be seeking, especially, and two of them sent me an email, congratulations, on the election.
There's huge opportunity for Canada if they want to actually attract the best and the brightest, and Americans who all the parties were sort of catering to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think it is. One sort of a final, perhaps, topic. It is kind of interesting that Canada's election stands quite apart from the elections we're seeing globally. I think, if you look around the world, I think you can see that most elections are quite right-leaning elections right now. I don't think that that's an exaggeration to say. To see Canada going to a centrist or a left, what would be typically a left-leaning government. I don't know.
I think that was the case before Trump. From what I understand, Australia is going through something very similar as Canada, and they had a conservative party that was expected to get a landslide that's now going to get obliterated. I think Donald Trump is sucking the wind out of conservative movements across the world, except in Russia.
It's like the pendulum swing. And I think that we do see this globally, the pendulum swing. Everybody goes far to the right and then it swings back. I think that with everyone seeing such a far right-leaning government, the elections precipitated by that election have started. We're just perhaps among the first that have happened since then.
Oh, yeah. It's going to... what happens after Trump remains to be seen, but he has not been good for conservative parties globally. No. That's for sure.
But you are starting to hear conversations about impeachment again. It's all pipe dream and all this kind of stuff right now. But you're already starting to hear those kinds of conversations circulate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll be heading down to Denver for the American Immigration Lawyer Conference, and it's going to be a very interesting experience. That's all I have to say.
Oh my God, yeah.
It is.
That is for those who have never been. I've been to 2 or 3 now, and especially if you're a Canadian lawyer, it's very interesting to see. Ayla, it's the power of 10 or 9. It's like 10 times, 9 times the CBA conference. It's huge. I went to the one in Chicago last year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Awesome. This has been fun, almost therapeutic to get thoughts out after last night's election. We'll see where everything
leads. It was a nail biter for sure.
Yeah, we'll see where everything heads. I don't know if Deanna's more optimistic, pessimistic.
I'm, I don't. The thing that I would say is I didn't feel quite as stressed going into this election as I expected to because of how the polling was. I didn't feel like there was any visionary leader going into this election, so I was not. I just felt like I didn't have a candidate, to be honest. And so for me, that was I wasn't really surprised. I wasn't really disappointed. It just, it is what it is. It's not going to be an exciting 4-year period, but I think that I'm certainly, personally, I'm relieved that we have I'm strangely relieved to know that we have another Liberal government. But yeah, I kind of, I'm sad that they're I don't like there being a 2-party Canada. I don't like that. Yeah. But I really just don't think that there was a viable left party.
For me, Carney reminds me a lot of Harper, and I was a Harper fan, so I'm curious to see what we'll get with Carney. I'm cautiously optimistic.
Yeah.
Mark, final thoughts?
Well, I've deliberately stayed away from my Alberta roots. So I'm this podcast to cater to everyone. But there was definitely the discussion last night of, Alberta separation, all those kinds of things. Lots of massive disappointment in the province. Just feeling like, you know, once again, it's all about the East, and the interests of Alberta are always just kind of dismissed or ignored, or just kind of tolerated during the election. And you know, like I said, lots of discussion along those lines. But I'm, you know, at this stage, anyways, for me, I posted on X, I think it was Saturday night, and I just said, you know, look, I'm just tired of the division. I'm tired of you having to, you know, to have this polarization of people. Like, and when you said, Deanna, that he talked about unity, that's exactly what the country needs. The last thing we need is doubling down and you know, and not having, you know, engaging conversations with the provinces, especially the ones that were like pretty much all blue. And I think for the betterment of the country, we just need to try to find a way to unite ourselves. And that's my hope. So
Yeah.
Here, here.
Yeah, agreed.